documents released in the conspiracy case against Donald Trump in the efforts to overturn the 2020 election. And Michigan and Detroit play a starring role. And the understudies get their chance in what appears to be the final debate of the campaign. Today is Sunday, October 6, 2024, and this is Flashpoint.
Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. Good to have you with us on this first Sunday of October, leaving us just about a month away from Election Day. Did you watch the vice presidential debate Tuesday night? 43 million viewers tuned in, ratings actually well below those of Kamala Harris and Mike Pence in their debate back in 2020. And that 2020 race did come up the other night. Most people felt J.D. Vance came off as pretty polished, but if he had a stumble, it was over not wanting to say Joe Biden won that election. And then the very next day, a new batch of documents was released in the case against Donald Trump's actions following the 2020 vote. It includes quite a bit about the activities in Michigan, including a Trump campaign employee who allegedly wanted to sow the seeds of chaos, practically start a riot at the TCF Center, as it was known at the time, where the Detroit vote was being tallied. With a month to go, we asked the question we've asked so often, whether it's the debate or the details from the court documents, does it matter? Will it make a difference come November 5th? We're going to talk about that this morning. Also today, we have talked about the very sad state of affairs when it comes to ethics rules in Michigan government and the free flow of people who move from the legislature, say, right into lobbying the Capitol that they just vacated. Well, new reporting by a very young group of newshounds is casting a harsh light on what I think it's fair to describe as an ethical cesspool around Lansing. We'll talk about that. And a huge new merger in Michigan healthcare. Is that a good thing for you and me? It's all today on Flashpoint. All right, the political pantry was again overflowing this week, as you would expect, just a little more than 4 weeks from Election Day. Let's talk about it with Nolan Finley. He's the editorial page editor of the Detroit News, and Khalil El-Hajjal is the deputy editor of the editorial page at the Detroit Free Press. And Khalil, it's nice to have you on the program for the first time.
Thanks for having me.
Good to have you. Let me start with you and your take on this past week. It was really interesting that I thought if the vice presidential debate I found fascinating. The one slip I felt that J.D. Vance made still doesn't want to answer about 2020, and then the very next day we get this document released that shows Detroit and Michigan playing a big central role in this case about overturning the election. What was your takeaway from all of it?
Yeah, I woke up this morning with that news from Todd Spangler in the Free Press about the Detroit element in that document.
Yeah.
I suppose it wasn't all that surprising, but it was, there was still some shock there to see just how far it went as far as members of that campaign, seemed like trying to incite a riot.
In fact, after being told by another person on the Trump campaign that the vote looked legitimate for Biden.
Right.
It didn't matter. Find something.
Find something, right. Right. And then when that came up in the debate, I was honestly a little disappointed that Walz didn't hit him a little harder on that point. I think he mentioned it, but I think they were pretty focused on staying civil, which was nice to see in the debate.
It was, yeah. We actually saw them shaking hands and introducing each other's wives after the debate. Nolan, this document, though, the Trump campaign keeps wanting to say just what J.D. Vance did that night, saying, look, we're looking ahead, we're not looking back. The Justice Department is looking back, and this is an active case. Isn't it fair?
Well, whether it's fair or not, I think voters, if you look at where the electorate is, at least 47-48% of the voters who support Trump, or of the electorate that supports Trump, has discounted January 6th. If they hadn't, Trump wouldn't be here. And it's sort of surprising that a president that did what he did on his way out of the office is right back in the thick of things here 4 years later. So I think any damage will be minimal because, again, I think his voters have discounted it. And I don't, I think a lot of them will say, well, this is just more of the lawfare we've seen since the beginning and trying to weaponize the Justice Department. However, they explain it. Voters aren't looking back. January 6th doesn't show up on the list of issues that motivate
Understood,
them.
but the case is on the docket,
Yeah.
and there are ramifications coming, especially if now that the Supreme Court has said, look, you can't go after Donald Trump on anything he did as president. I think this document helps makes the case that this was the actions of a candidate, not of as a president.
Sure it does, but whether it does or whether it doesn't is immaterial. January 6th is not proven to be an
influencer
an issue on this election.
But we have to think about what happens after the election when he's back in court.
Yeah, and I think if Donald Trump should win in November, all this goes away. I don't see how you continue with this.
Khalil, what are your thoughts on that? Moving forward then with this, because it looms large no matter whether the electorate wants it to or not. Jack Smith has it on the calendar.
I mean, the idea of a former president being carted off to prison is pretty intense, whether he wins or not. Yeah. I suppose if he wins, that won't be an issue, but whether or not it's a #1 priority issue for folks as far as January 6th, which I think for a lot of folks it is, it might become one now.
Well, in fact, then to Nolan's point, did anything happen this past week that moves the needle? Let's talk about the vice presidential debate. Sure. My takeaway, I suppose, in the end, while J.D. Vance was clearly the more polished debater, I suppose, I ended up thinking no harm, no foul. Nobody won or lost the election for their ticket.
It didn't feel like there were any particular real memorable moments from it, although Saturday Night Live is coming up, and I'm looking forward to see what happens there, and sometimes they can sort of impact the narrative a bit. Yeah. But the most memorable thing for me from the debate was the fact that there was no fact-checking allowed, apparently. All the parties agreed to no fact-checking, and at one point the moderator tried to fact-check J.D. Vance, and he said, I thought there was no fact-checking. To me, that's kind of an affront to everything we're doing here, on the journalistic side and on the,
It has made it very weird times for people like us, no doubt, who think that the media and the press, rather, not the media, but the press has a role in doing exactly that. But what was your takeaway of the debate?
Well, I mean, I thought it was refreshingly civil and substantive. I thought both men came prepared, and you saw a decency and a dignity that we haven't seen at that level of American politics in a long time, and I was pleased by this. This debate wasn't designed, though, and they never are. Vice presidential debates are never about selling the vice president. So who came across better, who came across worse is immaterial. They're about taking down the top of the ticket. And I think both candidates focused on not their immediate opponent, but the boss of their immediate opponent. And I think, you heard a lot of talk from Tim Walz, who didn't do all that well in his composure and his presentation.
But I really struggled with the Tiananmen Square question.
Well, because he fibs a lot. But, that's been fairly common in that ticket. Khalil,
I'll let you take a shot at that here in a second. Go ahead.
I mean, he's not the first person in that ticket to fib about their biography, but still, I mean, I thought he made some effective jabs at Donald Trump, and that was his job, and as did J.D. Vance. I think they both came out looking like somebody you could trust to sit in that Oval Office if they needed to be.
You want to is Nolan right to give the high ground on truthfulness right now?
That gave me pause a little bit. I mean, if we're going to talk about honesty and sincerity, I think even Nolan knows that's a liability for the Trump-Vance side.
It's been a liability for everybody. I mean, I don't know why these folks can't just tell the truth about who they are. I mean, you've got Kamala Harris out there pretending she's a rootin' tootin', gun-toting, baby fracker, and who is that?
Well, I pointed out last week, though, that maybe the most famous, not just vice presidential debate, one of the most famous moments in debate history came many years ago with Lloyd Benson's takedown of Dan Quayle, and it didn't end up obviously winning the election.
No.
So do these vice presidents for Michael Dukakis, do these matter?
Well, they matter in a sense because you do want a sense of who that person is going to be, who's sitting a heartbeat from the presidency. And again, I think it was reassuring in that regard.
Khalil, what's it feel like is going to make the difference to you?
Well, I think the difference was already made in the last debate with the comment about immigrants eating cats and dogs. I don't think that there was a moment that will stick in people's mind in this latest debate the way that one will.
Yeah.
The way I see it, that should have been the end of the race. It wasn't, obviously. It's still a tight race.
Yeah, no doubt.
But I think that particular moment, when it comes to this race and these debates, is the one that will stand out and last in people's minds.
Khalil, great to have you on the program. Thanks for being here. Nolan, as always.
Thank you.
Thank you. We come back. Another effort from the Detroit Free Press, as a matter of fact, talking about the ethics picture in the state of Michigan. Oxymoron? We'll talk about it next on Flashpoint. Michigan government is routinely cited for some of the worst ethics and transparency laws and guidelines in the country. If sunlight is the best disinfectant, Michigan acts like a vampire. I hope you've seen some of the terrific reporting on this in the Detroit Free Press by their Eye on Michigan team. These are very young reporters, some high schoolers, in fact, learning how to dig and how to report and finding some eye-popping truths about the millions of dollars lavished on state lawmakers without much restriction, oversight, or transparency. Joined by M.L. Elric, Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter and columnist for the Detroit Free Press, and Jack Armstrong, as American and great a name as you'll come by. Jack Armstrong, one of the young reporters with Eye on Michigan. Guys, thanks so much for being here. Before we dig into what you all found, which is troubling and worrisome, tell me a little bit about this idea. You're trying to create this next generation of people like you and me, right?
So we're an independent program. We're affiliated with the Free Press and the State News, but our work is like typo blood. It's available to every news organization in the state of Michigan, because we realize there are news deserts out there. We realize there are newsrooms that don't have the time or the resources to do this in-depth reporting that Jack and the team did. We spent a year on this. We thought it was going to be a quick look at who takes the most, but once we got deeper, we realized not only is it hard to tell, but the system is a disaster and it's full of loopholes.
Yep.
And so the best way to continue this is to bring the next generation along so that when we retire someday, we have some good stuff to read and a better government.
In fact, Jack, as somebody who's now coming into this at your age, and you just graduated from Michigan State, I worry all the time about the world that young journalists see. Newspapers going under, newspapers cutting back, same thing in TV newsrooms, radio newsrooms. What's the outlook? I mean, does this make you, what you found has to make you feel excited about the potential of journalism, I assume.
Yeah, sure. I mean, ML's been as good of a mentor as you could ask for, and the program is great. You know, it's a lot of college kids. You know, you get in a room with, order some pizzas, and you stay up for hours, you know, working through it.
That's right.
It does make you feel optimistic to see there's still an opportunity for college kids to get out there and do something, really get into the journalism grind like that in a project like this.
As you started to dig down into looking at the way that lobbyists in this state lavish meals and trips and gifts on lawmakers without a whole lot of restriction or really even any guardrails. This is your state you live in. What'd you think?
Yeah, I mean, a big problem is there's so much data to comb through, and a lot of it has mistakes in it. It's very hard to understand and to figure out what's going on. And, you know, the restrictions themselves are very loose. So going through this data, the average person is not doing that. So the best we can do is present it in a way that's accessible to someone, the average reader.
It's two different things, is right, finding the data and then also putting it into bite-sized, understandable bites, right?
Oh, yeah. So I've been doing this for 30 years, and I thought this was going to be a quick project. And, yeah, you know, wrong again, Elric. But I'll tell you, we do work with some experts, and one of the experts was a data analyst from the Free Press, Christy Tanner, and we got into the data, and she said, you have to understand, you clean the data before you do the analysis. And it never occurred to me that the raw information that's readily available to anyone was more or less useless because there were so many problems with it. And once we started to figure out the data and how it had holes in it, we started to realize the system had holes in it. So we found between 2001 and 2023, 17,000 transactions between lawmakers and lobbyists where the lobbyist reported buying a free meal or a trip. But we also found out that there are transactions less than $76 that never get reported. So we have no idea how much these guys are taking for free. And the bulk of the money that's spent wining and dining lawmakers is classified as group meals, where they buy a bunch of food for a bunch of people. We have no idea who's eating it, so we don't know who's been influenced.
What did you find to be the biggest problem? I mean, do you hold, Jack, these lawmakers responsible, or is it the system that they're simply taking advantage of because there really are no rules in place?
Sure. I mean, it's a little bit of both. There's problems all over the board. Personally, as a reporter, one of the biggest things we ran into is that no one wants to pick up the phone. That's a big problem. They won't talk about it, and if they do talk about it, they say they're above board, so there's really nothing wrong.
Which, in fact, you quoted a number of people that you were able, nobody was really, it seemed, willing to go on the record in depth in this. This program has been around now, Flashpoint, for 26 years. Wow. I don't know that we have a more consistent topic, and you've been on this program many times about the ethics lapses that exist, whereas opaque a state as there is in the country, everybody in fact, Governor Whitmer ran on this idea of we're going to open things up. It never happens.
No.
Where is the culprit in that?
Well, listen, this is incumbent upon us, and by us I mean us, but I mean everybody watching, to do something about it. You can take a look at the stories at freep.com. I think maybe we'll give you some links to share, but there's a searchable database. You can look up every lawmaker that has served since 2001 and find out how much they took. And you can let your lawmaker know how you feel about it. And Jack and the team caught up with some lawmakers who didn't want to answer questions, and one of them said to Jack and his colleagues, you know, I think the media cares more about this than regular people do. So when I wrote about it in my On Guard column for the Free Press, we included her phone number and her email, and if you care about it, let her know.
Because, again, even though we can find some of what's being spent, we can't necessarily find malfeasance in that. It's just an ethical lapse, right, Jack?
That's right. Yeah, you know, and it's also very hard to go through. There's duplicate names, there's misspellings, so no one is going to sit at their couch and go through Secretary of State data in that form. It won't make sense.
So your takeaway from this entire experience so far, is there much more to do on this, or are you guys ready to move on to the next project? Because they never end.
Right, there's always more to do, but you know, on to the next at some point. There's a lot of stuff out there to take care of.
Yeah, we'll have a new team. We'll be tackling some new projects. We want everybody in the state to have access to this because we think everybody in the state is affected by this. And if people want to support it, there's another way to do that. You can send us some dough. We'll take it.
Of course, yeah, of course. And the other problem here isn't just the way that these laws work on what you can take, but we have this pathway that moves from the legislature in the lobbyist's office directly. You come out of one building and walk right into the one next door.
Yeah, one of the stories that really jumped out at us was there was a lawmaker who had sponsored some legislation for a business that they really liked, and then he got a job with the business. Now he's a vice president. Jack called everybody in his family, never returned a call.
Mel, I look forward to the day when you and I do not have this to talk about on the program. But
are we going to live that long?
I don't see it yet. Jack, thanks very much and congratulations.
Thank you so much.
We come back, we'll talk about the big healthcare merger in Michigan. This is Flashpoint on Local 4. All right, welcome back. Last week, Henry Ford Health finalized its merger with Ascension, Michigan, creating Michigan's second largest health system. It'll mean 13 acute hospitals, 2 behavioral health hospitals, and 550 sites of care. Henry Ford Health jumps from 33,000 employees to 50,000. I talked with CEO Bob Riney about where it leaves patients like you and me. That's massive. As somebody whose hometown has 20,000 people in it, I mean,
it is a city.
It's a city. It is. I mean, and that's trying to manage that. You know, the old saying is that you can't move an aircraft carrier on a dime. This presents new challenges for you too.
It does, because you know, culture has always been something that we lean into and that we really care a lot about. And we really believe that the larger we get, we have to maintain the soul of a small company. And easy to say, right? But you have to put some real purposeful actions in place.
Let me take the cynic's side. A cynic will say, you know, we're always told that mergers are going to be great for us. They really end up being great for maybe shareholders and certainly executives. But at the end of the day, like, look at the way so many airline mergers have worked out. Have they really made things better for the flying customer? Not so much. So how do you handle the cynic's view of mergers that don't really maybe help at the end of the day?
Well, first of all, I think a cynic's view is healthy because it challenges us to make sure that we are living up to the values that we have set forth. So I actually like cynics, and I like cynics to hold organizations to a task. Having said that, I think there's a fundamental difference of 2 organizations coming together and committing to Michigan, where it's been its home, in a not-for-profit model, so that any revenues that we bring in that exceed expenses go right back into investments into our community programs, in investments into new technology, into innovation and breakthrough. There's no shareholder that's expecting a payout at the end of the quarter. And I think that that's a really important model for what we're trying to deliver.
Because we've seen a number of healthcare mergers over the last couple of years in Southeast Michigan, do we still have as healthy a level of competition? I guess this goes back to the cynical nature of view of mergers. Do we still have that healthy level of competition that at the end of the day gives people better care?
Absolutely. We have still more diversification of healthcare systems in a market our size than most markets in the country. We have a lot of great competition, and we have a lot of competition because there was a lot of health systems that were built here during the time of the growth of the auto industry that have served us really well. So the competition is still very strong, and the collaboration is reasonably good as well, and I think that's a good place for us to be.
That's Henry Ford Health CEO Bob Riney, now leading Metro Detroit's largest healthcare provider. That's it for today. Meet the Press coming up next. We'll see you next time for Flashpoint.